Gray clouds hung low over Redmond as the bus Haley was riding pulled into town. Familiar streets, houses, and parks flashed by outside the window, everything that had once been her world, but now seemed foreign and distant. Haley pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 10 years. She hadn't been back here in almost 10 years. She had come for her father's funeral. The news of his death had taken her by surprise, a sudden heart attack. Just yesterday he had been alive and well, and today he was gone. The last time they had seen each other was 2 years ago. A tense dinner at a restaurant, awkward attempts to find common topics of conversation, and then a quick goodbye at the door. "Call me when you're in town," he had said then. She hadn't called. The bus stopped. Haley slung her backpack over her shoulders and got out. For a moment, it seemed as if time had frozen here. The same square with the fountain, the same shops around it, even the benches were in the same places. Only she herself had changed. She decided not to hail a taxi, but to walk to her father's house. 20 minutes at a leisurely pace. 20 minutes to collect her thoughts. Working as a teacher in an orphanage had taught her a lot. Patience, acceptance, and the ability to see the best in people. But most of all, she had learned to appreciate family, something most of her charges had never had, and something that had proved so fragile for her. Her mother had always said, "Family isn't blood ties, it's what you do for each other every day." Her parents had stopped doing anything for each other long before they officially divorced. The house appeared around the bend in the road, large, 2 stories high, with a wide porch. Haley stopped to look at it. Something had changed, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. New paint? Different curtains? She walked slowly up the driveway toward the front door, memories flooding her mind. Here, by this tree, her father had taught her to ride a bike. She had fallen and skinned her knee, and he had put her on his shoulders and carried her around the yard until she stopped crying. Here, on this porch, she and her mother had drunk lemonade on a hot summer day before everything fell apart. And here, at the gate, she stood on the day she left with her mother for another city, looking back in the hope that her father would come out and ask them to stay. He didn't come out. Haley took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Veronica opened the door, a slender woman with perfect hair and flawless makeup, as if she were going to a business meeting rather than a funeral. She looked beautiful for her 45 years, the result of regular visits to the beautician and strict diets, which she never failed to mention. "Oh, it's you," she said, in a tone that suggested Haley was late for dinner, rather than attending her father's funeral. "Come in. We've been waiting for you since yesterday." "I couldn't come earlier," Haley replied, stepping over the threshold. "I had to find a replacement at work." "Of course, your job." Veronica waved her hand as if shooing away an annoying fly. "Come on in. The guest room is upstairs." Guest room, Haley noted to herself. Not your room, not the room where you grew up, but the guest room. That was right. She was a guest here now. Much had changed in the house. Different furniture, different colors, different smells. Only the photographs on the walls remained the same. Her father in his youth, her grandfather and grandmother, Haley herself as a child. But new ones had been added, Veronica and Fred at their wedding, Nathan in his graduation suit, family portraits where Haley was no longer present. Nathan came out of the living room, a tall young man of 23 with dark hair and features reminiscent of Veronica. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Haley thought she saw something like embarrassment or even guilt flash in his eyes. But it quickly disappeared, replaced by cool politeness. "Hi, Haley," he said, holding out his hand. "My condolences." "Likewise," she replied, shaking his hand. Nathan was Veronica's son from her first marriage, and Fred had adopted him when he married Veronica. Haley hardly knew him. When her father brought his new family home, she was already living with her mother in another city. "You must be tired from your trip," Nathan said, stepping aside. "The funeral is tomorrow at 11 in the morning." "Thank you," Haley nodded and headed for the stairs. As she climbed the steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't going up to her own home, but to some kind of hotel. Even the creaking of the floorboards sounded different. The guest room was indeed Haley's former bedroom, but there was no trace of her childhood left, Neutral, beige walls, a neat double bed, a chest of drawers, and a desk by the window. There were no posters of the bands she loved as a teenager, no bookshelves, no stuffed animals, nothing that reminded her of herself. Haley put her backpack on the floor and walked over to the window. From here she could see the backyard with the apple tree she loved to climb as a child. The apple tree was still there, but the yard had changed. There was now a gazebo, new flower beds, and a neatly trimmed lawn. The landscaping was clearly Veronica's work. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. She was 10 when her parents started fighting constantly. At first it was quiet at night, when they thought she was asleep. Then it got louder, and they didn't even try to hide it anymore. "You're never home. You don't care what happens to our family. I can't take this anymore." And then there was silence, a scary, oppressive silence when her parents stopped talking altogether. Mom left suddenly, taking Haley with her. "We'll live with Grandma until things work out," she said at the time. But nothing worked out. 3 months later, the divorce papers arrived, and my father didn't even try to contest them. Then there were occasional phone calls and even more occasional meetings, each of which became more and more strained until they became a formality. 4 years later, my father married Veronica. Haley found out about it after the fact, from a brief phone conversation. "I have a new family now," he said at the time, "but you're always welcome to visit." She didn't. A knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. "Miss Donnelly?" An elderly woman with a kind, wrinkled face peeked into the room. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Martha Silvers. I've been working for your family for 20 years. "Of course I remember you, Martha," Haley smiled. "You baked the most delicious chocolate chip cookies." "Oh, you remember," Martha beamed. "I brought you some clean towels and wanted to ask if you needed anything. Maybe some tea or a snack for the road?" "Tea would be nice, thank you," Haley nodded. Martha placed the towels on the bed and looked closely at Haley. "How you've grown," she said quietly. "I'm so glad you came. Your father, he often spoke of you." "Really?" Haley asked, surprised. "I thought he had forgotten all about me." "Oh no, miss." Martha shook her head. "He never forgot. There's still a photo of you in his office. He was proud of you, even if he couldn't always show it." Haley felt a lump rise in her throat. She nodded, unable to speak. "I'll bring you some tea," Martha said softly, and left quietly, closing the door behind her. Haley sat down on the bed, trying to collect her thoughts. She had come to say goodbye to her father, whom she thought she had lost long ago. But maybe things weren't as simple as she had thought all these years. Martha brought the tea 10 minutes later, hot, with lemon, just the way Haley liked it as a child. She smiled gratefully at the elderly woman. "Martha, what happened to my father? All I was told was that he had a heart attack." "Yes, miss. It happened 3 days ago. He was working late in his office, as usual. I brought him his dinner, and he seemed perfectly healthy. And then, in the morning—" Martha fell silent, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "In the morning, I came in with breakfast and found him. The doctors said he died instantly without even feeling any pain." "Did he often work late?" Haley asked, sipping her tea. "Almost every night, especially in the last year. He said he needed to get the company's affairs in order." Haley nodded. Her father had always been a workaholic. His construction company always came first. Perhaps that was what had led to the collapse of their family. "And how are Veronica and Nathan?" she asked, not knowing how else to keep the conversation going. Martha paused, as if searching for the right words. "They're upset, of course. Mr. Nathan has become very quiet and hardly leaves his room, and Miss Veronica—" She fell silent again. "Everyone has their own grief, Miss Haley." Haley sensed a certain undertone in her words, but didn't press further. She would have time to find out what had been going on in her father's family in recent years. After Martha left, Haley unpacked her things and took a shower. She went down to the dining room for dinner, where Veronica and Nathan were already sitting, staring silently at their plates. "Sit down," Veronica nodded toward an empty chair. "Martha made roast beef." Dinner was tense and silent. Haley could feel Veronica's eyes on her, cold and judgmental. Nathan hardly looked at her, concentrating on his food. "Warren Kincaid is coming tomorrow after the funeral. Veronica finally said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. He's your father's lawyer. We'll need to discuss some formalities. What formalities? Haley asked. The will, of course. Veronica poured herself some wine. Your father had a successful company, a house, bank accounts. All of that will need to be distributed. Her tone, confident, almost condescending, made Haley feel uncomfortable. Veronica was already acting like she owned everything her father had left behind. I don't expect to get anything, Haley said calmly. I came to say goodbye to my father, not to claim an inheritance. How noble, Veronica smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. However, that's the right thing to do. After all, you haven't been here for 10 years. Nathan and I were there for Fred the whole time. Mom, Nathan said quietly, looking up from his plate for the first time during the entire dinner. Let's not do this now. Veronica shrugged and took a sip of wine. Just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, dear. Haley was always a realist, she said, looking at her stepdaughter. Wasn't she? Haley didn't answer, silently finishing her dinner. She knew Veronica was trying to provoke her, and she wasn't going to give in. The morning of the funeral was cloudy but dry. The ceremony was held at the city cemetery, and Haley was surprised by the number of people who had come to say goodbye to her father, colleagues, business partners, old friends. Many approached her with condolences, but she saw curiosity in their eyes. The prodigal daughter had returned for the funeral of a father she hadn't spoken to in years. Veronica was flawless, a grieving widow accepting condolences with dignity and restraint. Nathan stood next to her, pale and distant, as if what was happening did not concern him. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, Haley felt tears running down her cheeks. She mourned not only her father, but also all the missed opportunities, all the unspoken words, all the moments they would never have. After the ceremony, when most of the guests had left, an elderly man in a formal suit approached her. Haley, he said, extending his hand, I'm Warren Kincaid, your father's lawyer. My condolences. Thank you, she nodded, shaking his hand. We haven't seen each other in many years, but I remember you well, Warren continued. You were just a little girl the last time I was at your house. Haley vaguely remembered him as one of her father's business associates who often came to their house for dinner. We need to talk, he said seriously. Your father left a will, and I'll be at your house tomorrow at 2 o'clock to read it. Please be there. Of course, Haley nodded. I'll be there. Warren looked at her intently, as if he wanted to say something else, but changed his mind. See you tomorrow, he said, and walked to his car. Haley watched him go, feeling a strange uneasiness growing inside her. Something in Warren's tone, in his gaze, made her wary. She didn't expect to receive anything from her father's estate, but apparently her presence at the reading of the will was necessary. That evening, lying in bed in the guest room, Haley thought about what she would learn tomorrow about her father's last wishes. Perhaps it would be a mere formality. Veronica would get the house and the company, Nathan would get his share, and she would get some memento. Or maybe her father hadn't mentioned her at all in his will, which would have been logical, considering how little they had communicated in recent years. But something told her that it wasn't that simple, and that something kept her awake until morning. The morning was gray and damp. Haley woke up early and stared at the ceiling for a long time, gathering her thoughts. Today was the day the will was to be read. It wasn't that she was expecting anything. No. It would be more accurate to say that she wasn't expecting anything. At most, some mementos, photographs, or her father's watch. She was the last one down for breakfast. Veronica and Nathan were already sitting at the table. Martha was bustling about the stove, making omelets. Good morning, Haley said, sitting down across from Nathan. Nothing good, Veronica snapped, stirring her coffee. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. Although, maybe for some people today will be a good day. Haley didn't answer, silently watching as Martha placed a plate of omelet and toast with jam in front of her. Thanks, Martha. You're welcome, miss, the housekeeper replied quietly, and withdrew to the kitchen. I wonder what Fred left in his will, Veronica said, spreading butter on her toast. Although, of course, I have my guesses. Mom, Nathan shot her a warning glance. What do you mean, Mom? Veronica raised her eyebrows. I'm just thinking out loud. After all, Fred and I were married for 8 years. I was there when he was sick, when the company was in crisis, when he needed my support. She glanced at Haley. Some people only show up at funerals. I didn't come for the inheritance, Haley replied calmly, sipping her tea. I don't want anything from my father. Oh, how noble! Veronica rolled her eyes dramatically. Then why are you here? To say goodbye, Haley replied simply. Veronica snorted and returned to her breakfast. Nathan glanced furtively at Haley, his eyes betraying something akin to sympathy. Mr. Kincaid will be here at 2, he said, finally breaking the heavy silence. I think it will be over quickly. Of course it will, Veronica nodded. It's perfectly clear. The company, the house, the bills, everything goes to us, Fred's family. Us? Haley asked, looking closely at her stepmother. Me and Nathan, of course. Veronica cut off a piece of omelet and put it in her mouth. Maybe you'll get some mementos. Fred was sentimental when it came to the past. I already told you I don't want anything, Haley repeated. I'll be there at 2, listen to Mr. Kincaid and take the evening bus. Oh, so soon? Veronica asked with feigned surprise. I thought you'd stay longer, visit old friends, reminisce about your childhood. I have work, Haley explained curtly. I can't leave the kids for long. Oh yes, your job at the children's home. Veronica pursed her lips as if the words left a bad taste in her mouth. A noble occupation, though not a very lucrative one. It's not about the money, Haley said. These children need— Please, Veronica interrupted, raising her hand. Let's not talk about sad things. Today is already a difficult day. The rest of breakfast was spent in tense silence. Veronica scrolled through her phone, Nathan stared at his plate, and Haley thought about how quickly familiar walls could become foreign. The house where she had grown up now seemed like a strange place, full of coldness and hostility. After breakfast, Haley went up to her room and called work. The children asked when she would be back. She didn't want to upset them, so she promised she would try to come home as soon as possible. Then she sat by the window for a long time, looking at the old apple tree in the yard and thinking about her father, what he had been like when he was alive. Reserved, absorbed in his work, emotionally distant. Even when she was a child, when she and her mother were still a family. He was rarely at home, and when he did show up, he was more like a guest than the man of the house. As a child, she often fantasized that one day he would change, become an attentive and loving father who would spend time with her and take an interest in her life. But that never happened. Instead, he found a new family, Veronica and her son, whom he adopted and gave his last name. Perhaps with them, he was able to become what he couldn't be for Haley and her mother. There was a knock at the door. It was Martha with a cup of hot tea. I brought you some tea, Miss Haley, she said, placing the cup on the table by the window. I know you've had a difficult day. Thank you, Martha, Haley smiled. You've always been so kind to me. I'm just doing my job, miss, Martha replied modestly, but Haley saw genuine warmth in her eyes. Your father thought very highly of you, you know. He couldn't always show it, but he did. Really? Haley looked at the housekeeper incredulously. I thought he had completely forgotten about me after he married Veronica. Martha shook her head. No, miss. He always asked your mother how you were doing and was interested in your achievements, and he was very proud when he found out you were working with children. He asked my mother about me? Haley asked in surprise. Mom never mentioned it. Perhaps she didn't want to reopen old wounds, Martha suggested gently. In any case, remember that appearances can be deceiving, especially when it comes to feelings. With that, she left, leaving Haley alone with new questions. Had she been wrong all these years, thinking her father had forgotten her? Had he been watching her life, just not showing it? And if so, why hadn't he tried to reconnect with her, not called, not written? At 2:00, Haley went down to the living room. Veronica was sitting in an armchair, nervously tapping her fingernails on the armrest. Nathan was standing by the window with his hands behind his back, a posture that reminded Haley of her father. Martha had set out cups and cookies on the coffee table, but no one touched the refreshments. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Martha let Warren Kincaid in, a gray-haired man with attentive eyes and an old-fashioned leather briefcase in his hands. "Good afternoon," he greeted everyone. "I hope I'm not late." "No, you're always punctual, Warren," Veronica said, pointing to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat. We're all here and ready to hear Fred's will." Warren nodded, sat down in the chair, and opened his briefcase, taking out a folder with documents. "Before we begin," he said, looking around at those present, "I would like to express my sincere condolences to all of you. Frederick was not only my client, but also a good friend. His passing is a great loss for all of us." "Thank you, Warren," Veronica nodded. "We appreciate your words. Now, if you don't mind, let's get down to business. The last few days have been difficult." "Of course," agreed the lawyer, opening the folder. "So I will now read the last will and testament of Frederick Donnelly, signed and certified in my presence 3 months ago." Veronica blinked in surprise. 3 months ago?" she asked. "But Fred didn't say anything about a new will." "He didn't think it necessary to mention it," Warren replied in a neutral tone. "May I continue?" Veronica nodded silently, although Haley noticed her fingers tighten on the armrests of her chair. "I, Frederick James Donnelly, being of sound mind and memory, hereby express my last will and testament regarding the disposition of my property after my death." Warren began reading. "To my wife, Veronica Ellen Donnelly, I leave the sum of $100,000, as well as her personal car, all jewelry given to her by me, and the right to use the house for 3 months after my death to find new accommodation." Veronica sat up straight in her chair, her face frozen. "What?" she said, almost in a whisper. "Only $100,000? And 3 months?" Warren continued, seemingly oblivious to her reaction. "To my adopted son, Nathan James Donnelly, I leave the sum of $50,000 for his education, as well as 10% of the shares in my company, Donnelly Construction." Nathan turned pale and sank into the nearest chair. He didn't say a word, but Haley saw a mixture of shock and confusion in his eyes. "All of my other property, including the house at 17 Oak Street, my 90% share in Donnelly Construction, all bank accounts and other assets, I leave to my daughter, Haley Mary Donnelly." A deafening silence hung in the room. Haley felt her breath catch in her throat. She must have misheard. This was some kind of mistake. "No!" Veronica almost shouted, jumping up from her chair. "This can't be! Fred couldn't have done this! I was his wife for 8 years. For 8 years I took care of him, supported him, was there for him." "Veronica, please." Warren raised his hand. "Let me finish. There are more conditions." "What other conditions?" Veronica sank back into her chair, her face contorted with anger. "This is just unthinkable." "However," Warren continued reading, "this inheritance is subject to the following conditions. Haley Mary Donnelly must live in the specified house for at least 6 months and personally manage the affairs of Donnelly Construction throughout that period. If this condition is not met, the entire inheritance will be divided equally among charitable organizations in the city of Redmond, including the New Hope Children's Home." Haley couldn't believe her ears. Not only did she get most of her father's estate, but she also had to stay here for 6 months and run a company she knew practically nothing about? It seemed absurd. "I think I have the right to contest this will," Veronica said coldly, pulling herself together. "Fred must have been out of his mind when he wrote it. Leave everything to his daughter who hasn't spoken to him in 10 years? That's ridiculous." "The will was drawn up according to all the rules," Warren replied calmly. "Frederick was of sound mind when he signed it. There is an independent medical report confirming this. I strongly advise you not to waste your time and money contesting it." I don't understand," Haley said, still trying to process what she had heard. "Why did my father leave all this to me? And why with such a strange condition?" Warren looked at her with a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Frederick left a letter addressed to you personally," he said, taking an envelope out of his briefcase. "I think you'll find the answers to your questions in it." Haley took the envelope with trembling hands. It was addressed to Haley in her father's familiar handwriting. This is absurd! Veronica jumped up, her face red with anger. I won't let some girl who wasn't even part of Fred's life take everything that belongs to Nathan and me. I was his wife. I built this life with him. She grabbed the wine glass from the table and took a big gulp. You were always a burden to him, she said, looking straight at Haley. He never talked about you, never mentioned you, and now this house, this company, it all belongs to us. Mom, please. Nathan tried to calm Veronica down, but she pushed his hand away. No, Nathan, I won't keep quiet. You know how much I put into this marriage, into this family. And for what? So that some ungrateful... I think we all need to calm down, Warren interrupted firmly. Emotions aren't helping anyone right now. Haley, he turned to the girl, you have 6 months to make a decision. You can renounce your inheritance right now and it will go to charity, or you can fulfill the terms of the will. And if I refuse, Haley said slowly, what will happen to Veronica and Nathan? If you refuse, they will receive only what is specified in the will, Warren explained. $100,000 for Veronica and $50,000 plus 10% of the shares for Nathan. The house and the company will go to charities. Veronica let out a sound like a stifled sob. I can't let that happen, she whispered. I can't. You must vacate the house within 3 months, Warren reminded her, regardless of Haley's decision. But if... Haley paused, trying to formulate her thoughts. If I accept the inheritance and fulfill the condition, can Veronica and Nathan continue to live here? At least temporarily? That will be entirely up to you, Warren replied. You will be the owner of the house and can decide for yourself who will live there. Haley looked at Veronica and Nathan. She didn't feel particularly fond of them, but she couldn't leave them without a roof over their heads. She wasn't that kind of person. I need to think about it, she said, clutching the envelope with her father's letter in her hands. This is too... unexpected. Of course. Warren nodded. You have time. But if you decide to accept the inheritance, you'll have to start familiarizing yourself with the company's affairs right away. There are important issues that need to be addressed immediately. Wait, Nathan interrupted, speaking for the first time since the reading of the will began. Haley knows nothing about the construction business. I've been working with my father for the last 3 years. I studied management. How is she going to run the company? The will states that Haley is to take over the company, Warren replied. That doesn't mean she has to do it alone. She can hire a manager or, he looked at Nathan, rely on those who are already familiar with the business. That's ridiculous, Veronica interrupted again. This is all ridiculous. Fred couldn't have done this to us. Nevertheless, he did, Warren said firmly, gathering the documents back into his briefcase. And his wishes must be carried out. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Haley, if you have any questions, you can contact me at any time, he said, handing her his business card. My secretary always knows where to find me. Haley nodded silently, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. Warren. Veronica rose from her chair, her voice tense but no longer angry. We need to talk in private. I'm sure we can work something out. I'm afraid a compromise is not possible in this case, Warren replied. Frederick's will is perfectly clear, but if you have any legal questions, I am certainly willing to answer them. After the lawyer left, a heavy silence hung in the living room. Haley stood clutching her father's letter, not knowing what to say. Veronica looked at her with undisguised hatred. I hope you're happy, she said through clenched teeth. You got everything you came here for. I didn't know about the will, Haley replied quietly, and I didn't ask my father to leave me anything. Of course not, Veronica sneered. What a coincidence. You haven't spoken to your father in 10 years, and then you show up and suddenly everything goes to you. Mom, Nathan put his hand on her shoulder. Haley really couldn't have known. Dad didn't tell anyone about the new will. Don't defend her. Veronica shook off his hand. She destroyed everything I've worked for over the last 8 years. For 8 years, I put up with Fred, his obsession with work, his coldness. And for what? She grabbed her glass again, finished her wine, and slammed it down on the table. You know what? Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're not getting anything. I'm going to contest the will. I'll prove that Fred wasn't in his right mind when he wrote it. Then we'll see what's left of your inheritance." With that, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Haley and Nathan were left alone. Nathan looked lost and confused. "I'm sorry about my mom," he said after a long silence. She's just in shock. We're all in shock." "I understand," Haley nodded. "I don't understand anything either. Why did Dad do this?" Nathan shrugged. "I don't know. He'd changed a lot lately. He'd become pensive, often sitting alone in his office. Mom said it was because of problems at work, but..." He fell silent, staring out the window. Maybe that wasn't the only reason. Haley looked at the envelope in her hands. Perhaps the answers to all her questions were there, in that letter. "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked, turning to her. "With the inheritance, I mean." "I don't know," Haley replied honestly. "I need to think. I have a job, children who are waiting for me to come home. I couldn't imagine finding myself in this situation." "You can refuse," Nathan said, and Haley detected a faint hope in his voice. "Then at least the house and the company won't go to charity. Mom can contest that part of the will." Haley shook her head. "I don't know what to do, Nathan. I really don't. I need to read my father's letter and understand why he did this." Nathan nodded, though his face showed his disappointment at her response. "I understand. Just know that this is a blow to us too. I worked at the company, preparing to take over someday, and now..." He didn't finish his sentence, but Haley knew what he meant. Now all his plans, all his dreams were shattered. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "I didn't want it to turn out this way." "I know." Nathan smiled weakly. "And I believe you didn't know about the will. It's so complicated." He headed for the living room door but stopped in the doorway. "If you do decide to accept the inheritance," he said without turning around, "I could help you with the company. I know how everything works. I know the people. I know the projects." "Thank you," Haley replied, surprised by his offer. I'll think about it." When Nathan left, she sank into the chair where Warren had been sitting just a moment ago and stared at the envelope in her hands for a long time. Whatever her father had written in it could change her whole life. She had to decide whether to return to her job and the children who needed her or stay here, in a house full of bitter memories, and carry out her father's last wish. The decision she had to make was not an easy one. Haley woke up to the sound of breaking glass. She lay there for a few seconds, not knowing where she was. Then reality hit her like a wave. Her father's house, the will, the tense atmosphere. She decided to stay for a week to sort through the papers and figure out what to do next. After reading her father's letter, she had many questions that she hoped to find answers to. Pulling on her jeans and sweater, Haley went down to the kitchen. There she found Martha sweeping up the pieces of a broken cup. "Good morning, Martha," Haley greeted her. "What happened?" "Oh, miss," sighed the elderly woman. "I'm so clumsy. I put your cup on the edge of the table and it fell." But something in Martha's voice told Haley that wasn't the whole truth. She looked closer and saw that the pieces of her favorite childhood cup, white with kittens painted on it, were lying on the floor. Her father had kept it all these years, and until that day, it had been on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet. "I'll help," Haley said, kneeling down next to Martha. Together they gathered the pieces, and Haley noticed that the cup hadn't just fallen. The shelf it had been on was tilted at a strange angle, as if someone had deliberately sawed off the bracket. "Martha," Haley asked quietly as they threw away the pieces, "this is Veronica's, isn't it?" The housekeeper lowered her eyes, clearly not wanting to speak ill of her employer, but not daring to lie either. "Miss Veronica is going through a difficult time," was all she said. "Grief affects people in different ways." After breakfast, which Haley ate alone, neither Veronica nor Nathan came down to the table, she decided to go to her father's office. Before leaving, she called the orphanage to find out how her charges were doing. Joshua, a 6-year-old boy with a difficult personality, missed her especially. "Miss Haley, will you be back soon?" he asked in a thin voice, and her heart sank. "I'll try, sweetie," she replied. I have important things to do here. Remember I told you about my dad? He died, and I have to take care of his house and his work. What about us? The boy's voice was tearful. What about us? I haven't forgotten about you, Haley said firmly. You're all my little brave ones, and I'll be back very soon. The Donnelly construction office was located in a modern building in the city center. When Haley entered the spacious lobby, she was met with surprised looks from the employees. Apparently, the news of the will had already spread throughout the company. Miss Donnelly? A young woman with a tablet in her hands approached her. I'm Emily Chase, your father's secretary. Former secretary. My condolences. Thank you, Emily. Haley nodded. I'd like to look at my father's office and get a better understanding of the company's affairs. Her father's office was exactly as Haley remembered it. Austere, functional, without unnecessary details. Only the photos on the wall surprised her. Among the pictures of construction sites and group photos with employees, she noticed a photo of herself. Not a childhood photo, but a recent one. She was at her university graduation, wearing a cap and gown. Where did he get this? Haley muttered, moving closer. Your father asked me to find your photos on social media, replied Emily, standing in the doorway. He wanted to be aware of the important events in your life, even though he wasn't directly involved in them. Haley felt a lump rise in her throat. So her father had been watching her life? But then why hadn't he called, written, or tried to mend their relationship? By midday, there was a knock at the door and Nathan entered the office. He looked tense and uncertain. Hi, he said, shifting from one foot to the other. I thought, maybe you needed some help? Haley looked at her stepbrother in surprise. After yesterday's reading of the will, she expected anything from him but an offer of help. Thanks, she replied after a pause. I could really use some help from someone who knows the company from the inside. They spent the next few hours going over current projects. Nathan proved to be a good explainer, talking clearly and concisely about construction sites, contractors, problems, and the company's achievements. Why are you helping me? She asked when they took a coffee break. After everything that's happened? Nathan shrugged, staring into his cup. It's still my father's company, he said quietly. Not my biological father, but he raised me and gave me his name. I don't want everything he built to fall apart. What does your mother think about this? Haley asked bluntly. Nathan grimaced. Mom thinks I'm betraying her by helping you. But she doesn't understand. It's not about you or her. It's about the company, the people who work here. When she got home that evening, Haley felt exhausted. She went up to her room, hoping to rest a little before dinner, but found that the door wouldn't open. The key turned in the lock, but something was blocking the mechanism. Great, she muttered, trying to deal with the door. Problems, Miss Haley. Veronica's cold voice came from behind her. Haley turned around. Her stepmother was standing there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The door won't open, Haley said, trying to sound calm. That's a shame, Veronica said. Something must have happened to the lock. It's an old house, you know. So many things can break. What did you do to the door? Haley asked bluntly. Me? Veronica feigned surprise. What makes you think I did anything? Maybe it's just rusty, or maybe a mouse got in and chewed through the wiring. Who knows? She moved closer, her eyes narrowing dangerously. Listen to me carefully. Veronica's voice became harsh. You may have the paperwork for this house, but they won't let you live here. I'll do everything I can to get you out of here before your 6 months are up, and then neither you nor your orphans will get anything. Half an hour later, with the help of Martha, who had brought tools, Haley was able to open the door. Someone had stuffed chewing gum into the keyhole. Martha shook her head but said nothing. Take this, she said, handing Haley a new lock. Put it on today, and lock the door when you leave. Thanks, Martha, Haley said, taking the lock. I didn't think it would come to this. It will, and worse, the housekeeper replied quietly. Miss Veronica, she's not used to losing. After installing the new lock, Haley went down to the kitchen to grab a bite to eat. There she found Martha preparing dinner. Miss Haley, Martha began, lowering her voice. I probably shouldn't say this, but Mr. Fred has been very upset about the company lately. Did something happen? Haley asked, alarmed. It's not that anything happened, Martha said, barely audibly. It's just that he started to notice that things aren't going the way he planned. He's particularly concerned about Miss Veronica's involvement in the firm. She's involved? Haley asked, surprised. I thought my father always kept his business separate from his family. He did, Martha nodded. But Miss Veronica, she knows how to get what she wants. At first, she just asked for advice, then she started giving recommendations, and then, well, Mr. Fred began to notice that some decisions were being made without his knowledge, and those decisions weren't always in the best interests of the company. They fell silent. Haley pondered what she had heard. If her father had really begun to have doubts about Veronica and Nathan, that would explain his decision to hand over the company to his daughter. Martha, Haley began hesitantly, do you know why my parents got divorced? I mean, the real reason. Martha sighed, got up, and went to the stove, stirring something in a pot. It's not my place to stir up the past, she said without turning around. But your father had to make a difficult choice, and I'm not sure he made the right one. What are you talking about? Haley approached her. What choice? Martha shook her head. Not now, miss, not here. Walls have ears. She nodded toward the door. But if you want to know more about what happened between your parents, take a look in Mr. Fred's study. There's a box of letters in the bottom drawer of his desk. He kept them all these years. Haley looked at the housekeeper in surprise. Her father had also mentioned the bottom drawer of his desk in his letter. So Martha knew he had left her a clue? You knew about the will? Haley asked quietly. Martha smiled sadly. Not the details, no, but Mr. Fred often talked to me in the last few months. He regretted many things, especially losing touch with you and your mother. He said he had made a big mistake that he didn't know how to fix. The next morning, Haley woke up to a strange smell. She opened her eyes and coughed. The room was filled with smoke. The doorknob was hot. There was a fire outside. Fire! Haley screamed, jumping out of bed. Help! She ran to the window and threw it open, letting in fresh air. She heard shouting and footsteps in the hallway. Someone ran to the door. Haley! It was Nathan's voice. Are you there? Get away from the door! A moment later, the door burst open. Nathan had knocked it down with his shoulder. Behind him, Haley saw Martha with a fire extinguisher in her hands, already putting out the fire in the hallway. Are you okay? Nathan grabbed Haley by the shoulders, examining her from head to toe. Are you burned? No, she coughed. What happened? I don't know, Nathan shook his head. I just woke up from the smell of smoke. The fire was only near your door. Veronica soon appeared, wearing a silk robe and with her hair perfectly styled, as if she had woken up long ago and had time to get herself ready. My God, what happened here? She exclaimed, dramatically pressing her hand to her chest. I heard the noise and came right away. There was a fire, Mom, Nathan replied grimly, right outside Haley's door. Haley looked intently at her stepmother. There was no trace of surprise or fear in her eyes, only cold calculation. You know how this happened, Haley said quietly. Because you did it. What are you talking about? Veronica raised her eyebrows. How dare you accuse me of arson? Do you have any proof? That same day, Haley went to her father's study and found a box of letters. Letters from her mother, full of pain and disappointment, were interspersed with entries from her father's diary. They left today. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't tell them the truth, he wrote. Something had happened, something important related to the company that had destroyed their family. That evening, sitting in her room with her laptop on her knees, Haley Video chatted with the children from the orphanage. Their little faces on the screen reminded her of why she was here. She called her mother and asked her to come over. She needed answers to questions that were becoming more urgent with each new discovery. Elizabeth Donnelly arrived on a rainy Thursday. Haley met her mother at the bus station, hugged her tightly, and helped her carry a small suitcase to a taxi. They were silent all the way home. Too much was left unsaid between them. Too many questions needed answers. It's strange to be back here. Elizabeth said when the taxi stopped at the familiar two-story house. "I thought I'd never see this place again." "I thought so too," Haley nodded, paying the driver. "But here we are." She led her mother not through the front door, but through a side door that led straight to the kitchen. She didn't want to face Veronica right away. Fortunately, the kitchen was empty. Only the aroma of freshly brewed coffee indicated that Martha had been there recently. "I told her you were coming," Haley said, pouring her mother some coffee. "But I didn't say why." Elizabeth nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she took the cup. "Haley, sweetheart," she finally said, looking her daughter in the eyes, "I understand you have questions, but before we start this conversation, are you sure you want to know the truth? Sometimes ignorance is a blessing." "I need to know," Haley replied firmly. "I've lived with lies for too long, thinking that my father just cut us out of his life for a new family. But now I realize it wasn't that simple." Elizabeth sighed and put down her cup. "No, it's not that simple. It's never simple when it comes to love and family." They went up to Haley's room, the only place in the house where they could talk without being overheard. When the door closed, Haley pulled a wooden box of letters from under her bed, which she had taken from her father's study. "I found this," she said, opening the box. "The letters you wrote to him before the divorce, and his diary, which he started after we left." Elizabeth paled when she saw the familiar handwriting on the yellowed pages. "He kept them all these years," she whispered. "I can't believe it." "Mom," Haley sat down next to her on the bed. "In the diary, Dad writes about some truth he couldn't tell us, about some choice he made for the company. What was it? What really happened between you two?" Elizabeth was silent for a long time, smoothing the wrinkles in her skirt. Finally, she looked up at her daughter. "I never wanted you to know," she said quietly. "I thought it would be better this way. But maybe it's time for the truth." She took a deep breath and began to tell her story. "Your father and I really loved each other. It wasn't a mistake or a marriage of convenience. We were happy, especially when you were born. But then something happened to your father. He started to drift away, spending more and more time at work. I thought it was just business difficulties, but then I realized it was something else." Elizabeth stood up and walked over to the window, watching the rain drumming on the glass. "One day I found a letter from his doctor in his office. Your father had been diagnosed with a heart condition, not life-threatening, but requiring constant monitoring and lifestyle changes. He didn't tell me about it. When I asked him directly, he denied everything, said I was making it up." "Why?" Haley asked, puzzled. "Fear," Elizabeth replied simply. "Your father was always afraid of appearing weak, vulnerable. He believed he had to be strong for us, for the company, and gradually that fear became a wall between us." She turned to her daughter, her eyes full of pain. "He began to avoid intimacy, both emotional and physical. He said he was too busy, that he had a lot to do. And then he just said he didn't love me anymore, that he had met another woman." "And you believed him?" Haley asked quietly. "No," Elizabeth shook her head. "I knew he was lying. I tried to talk to him to understand what was going on, but he built such a wall around himself. In the end, I decided I couldn't live like that. I couldn't be with a man who pushed me away and refused to tell me the truth." "So you got divorced?" Haley began to understand. "Yes. I took you and left, hoping that the distance would make him come to his senses, open up. But instead, he just signed the divorce papers and let us go." Haley looked at her mother, trying to make sense of what she had heard. All these years, she had thought that her father had simply turned his back on them, that his business was more important to him than his family. But it turned out that he was afraid of his weakness, of his mortality, and that fear had destroyed their family. "Why didn't he tell me the truth later? When I was older?" Haley asked. "I think he was ashamed," Elizabeth replied. "He made a choice he regretted his whole life, but he couldn't change it. And then Veronica came along, Nathan was born, and your father probably decided it was best to leave the past in the past." Haley walked over to the box and took out another document, her father's last letter, dated a week before his death. It was addressed to Elizabeth, but never sent. "Listen to what he wrote," Haley said and began to read. Elizabeth, all these years I have lived with the knowledge that I made a terrible mistake. I chose loneliness over family, and it has been my curse. Now that Haley is grown and my fears no longer matter, I want to try to make things right. I know you will probably won't forgive me, and I'm not asking for that. But I want Haley to know the truth. I want her to understand why I did what I did, even if it doesn't excuse my actions. And I also want to ask, is there any chance we can start over? Not as husband and wife, but at least as people who once loved each other and raised a daughter together. Elizabeth covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Haley hugged her mother, feeling her own eyes fill with tears. "He was going to contact you," she said quietly, even before his heart finally gave out. "I wouldn't have answered," Elizabeth whispered. "I wouldn't have answered then. Too much pain, too many years have passed." "And now?" Haley asked, looking into her mother's eyes. Elizabeth didn't have time to answer. The door to the room burst open, and Veronica appeared in the doorway. Her face contorted with rage when she saw Elizabeth. "You!" she spat. "How dare you come to this house? Mom was my guest," Haley said firmly, standing between Veronica and Elizabeth. "And I have every right to invite her into my home." "Your home?" Veronica laughed sharply. "This house isn't yours yet. It hasn't even been 6 months, sweetheart, and I doubt you'll last that long." Her gaze fell on the box of letters, and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "What's that?" she asked, taking a step forward. "Where did you get Fred's things?" "From his study," Haley replied, standing her ground. "He left me a clue in a letter." "You went through his things?" Veronica's face turned pale with anger. "Those are personal documents. You had no right." "I have a right to know the truth about my parents," Haley replied calmly. "The truth about what really happened between them." Veronica glanced at Elizabeth, and something like fear flashed in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Her voice rose. "What truth? Your mother left Fred for her career. He told me himself." "That's not true," Elizabeth said, rising from the bed. The years had given her confidence, and she looked stronger than ever. "Fred pushed us away because he was afraid of his weakness. He was afraid that his heart condition would destroy the image of the strong man he had spent years creating." "Lies!" Veronica exclaimed, but something flashed in her eyes that looked like recognition. "Fred never mentioned any heart problems." "Of course not," Elizabeth replied calmly. "He hid it from everyone, even from you, apparently." Veronica lunged forward, trying to grab the box, but Haley was quicker. She stepped back, clutching the letters to her chest. "Give me that!" demanded Veronica, her voice trembling with rage. "Those are my husband's things. They belong to me." "No, Veronica," Haley said firmly. "These letters are part of my history. My father wanted me to find them." The next day, Haley made an appointment to meet with Warren Kincaid. They met in his office, a spacious room overlooking the city park. "I understand you have some questions," Warren said, as they sat down at the conference table. "Yes," Haley nodded, "and I hope you can answer them." She took copies of several letters from her father's box. "I found this," she said, handing the documents to the lawyer. "Letters from my mother and my father's diary. They talk about his heart condition and his fear of appearing weak. Is this true?" Warren stared at the papers for a long time, then took off his glasses and rubbed his nose wearily. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "Fred said he wanted to tell you the truth, but he didn't know how to start." "So, it's true?" Haley asked. "Dad pushed us away because of his fear?" Warren nodded slowly. "Fred was always a complicated man. Strong on the outside, but very vulnerable on the inside. When the doctors told him about his heart problems, he took it as a personal weakness, as a threat to everything he had built. Instead of letting his loved ones support him, he pushed them away so they wouldn't see him fall. But why didn't he try to fix things later, when he realized his mistake?" Haley tried to understand her father's logic. "Pride," Warren replied simply, "and shame. The more time passed, the harder it became to admit his mistake. And then Veronica came along, who didn't demand emotional intimacy from him, and Nathan, who needed a father. Fred convinced himself that it was better for everyone. What about Veronica?" Haley asked. Did she know about his heart problems? Yes, but much later, when his condition worsened. By then, they had been married for several years. Haley pondered his words. Her father had pushed her and her mother away, not because he didn't love them, but because he was afraid to show his weakness. That didn't excuse his actions, but at least it gave them some meaning. In the last months of his life, Fred often talked about you and your mother, Warren continued. He regretted the decisions he had made, the years he had lost. He even started writing a letter to Elizabeth, although I don't know if he ever finished it. I found that letter, Haley said quietly. He wanted to try to make things right. Warren smiled sadly. It's a shame he didn't get the chance to do that while he was alive. Maybe you can finish what he started. When Haley returned home, she found Elizabeth and Martha having tea in the kitchen. The two women were talking quietly, reminiscing about the past. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when the turkey burned and we ordered pizza? Martha said, and both women laughed. Fred was so upset, Elizabeth nodded. He always loved traditions. And little Haley was so happy, Martha added. She always preferred pizza to turkey. Haley smiled as she watched them. It was strange to see how quickly the two women had found common ground, as if there had been no years of separation and bitterness. Haley, dear, Elizabeth noticed her daughter in the doorway. How was your meeting with Mr. Kincaid? Informative, Haley replied, sitting down at the table. He confirmed the story about my father's illness, that he was afraid of appearing weak, and that's why he pushed us away. She briefly recounted her conversation with the lawyer. Elizabeth listened silently, clutching her teacup tightly. Poor Fred, she whispered when Haley finished. All this time I thought he had simply chosen his career over his family. But he was trapped by his own fears. But he did try to make amends, Martha said gently. Toward the end, he talked a lot about you and Haley. He even showed me some old photos. At that moment, Veronica quickly entered the kitchen. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying, but she stood straight and proud. Oh, what a lovely family scene, she said sarcastically. The ex-wife, daughter, and loyal housekeeper reminiscing about the good old days. Veronica, Haley began, but her stepmother cut her off. Don't bother, she snapped. I already know everything. You dug up dirty secrets from the past, and now you're going to use them against me. To ruin my reputation, to make me look like a homewrecker who broke up a happy family. No one is going to do that, Haley replied calmly. We just want to know the truth. The truth? Veronica laughed bitterly. The truth is that I loved your father. I truly loved him, despite his coldness and distance. I made a home for him. I was there for him all these years. And he still loved her. She pointed at Elizabeth, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Even at the end, even after all those years together, he still kept her photo in his office. He wrote her letters he never sent. He kept her damn things in the attic. She spun around and ran out of the kitchen, leaving everyone in confusion. I'll talk to her, said Nathan, who had suddenly appeared in the doorway. He had been quietly watching the scene, unnoticed. After he left, there was silence, which was broken by Elizabeth. She's right about one thing. Fred really loved me, and I loved him, despite all the mistakes and years of separation. That evening, when everyone had gone to their rooms, Haley went up to the attic. Among the dusty boxes and old furniture, she found what Veronica had mentioned, a trunk with her mother's belongings, clothes, books, photo albums, everything Elizabeth had left behind when she left in a hurry. Her father had kept these things, not thrown them away or destroyed them. He had cherished them all these years as his last connection to the past, to the family he had lost because of his own fears. Among the things was an envelope with her name on it. Inside, Haley found a letter from her father, addressed to her but never sent. It was dated her 18th birthday. Dear Haley, her father wrote, today you are 18 and you have become a grown woman. I haven't seen you in 8 years, but I know you have grown up to be smart and beautiful, just like your mother. I want you to know that every day without you has been filled with regret. I made a mistake that I cannot fix, but I hope that one day you will be able to forgive me, or at least understand me. I love you, daughter. I always have and always will. Your father. Haley pressed the letter to her chest. feeling tears running down her cheeks. So many years lost, so many words left unsaid, all because of fear and pride. Suddenly, she heard footsteps on the attic stairs. Veronica's head appeared in the doorway. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, climbing up to the attic. She was holding some papers in her hands. "Did you find my letter?" Haley nodded silently, wiping away her tears. "He wrote to you every year," Veronica continued, coming closer. "On your birthday. He never sent them, but he wrote them. I found these letters and read them. I was angry, of course, jealous." She handed Haley the papers she was holding. "Here, this is yours too. I wanted to destroy them when I found the will, but I couldn't. No matter how angry I was, they were part of Fred, part of the man I loved." Haley took the papers. They were her father's unsent letters to her from the last few years. Each one was filled with love, regret, and hope for forgiveness. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking at Veronica with new understanding. "Don't thank me." Veronica shook her head. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for Fred. He would have wanted you to know the truth." She turned to leave, but Haley stopped her. "Veronica, I know we'll never be close, but maybe we could at least not be enemies?" Veronica looked at her for a long time, then nodded slightly. "We'll see," she said, and started down the stairs. But halfway down, she stopped, and without turning around, added, "He loved you. Even when he was with me, part of his heart always belonged to you and your mother. I could never change that, no matter how hard I tried." With that, she left, leaving Haley alone with her father's letters and a new understanding of the past. After her discovery in the attic, Haley spent several days sorting through her father's letters and documents. Each letter, each diary entry, like pieces of a mosaic, formed a picture of a man she didn't really know, a man who lived with constant regret, but couldn't find the strength to change his situation. Her mother stayed in the house, occupying the guest room. Her presence strangely changed the atmosphere. The house, which had seemed cold and alien, gradually filled with memories, stories, and laughter. Haley often found Elizabeth and Martha talking in the kitchen, and these moments reminded her of what her life could have been like if her family hadn't fallen apart. Veronica kept to herself, spending most of her time in her room or somewhere outside the house. Nathan, on the other hand, increasingly joined Haley in company, helping her sort out projects and introducing her to employees and contractors. Something akin to mutual respect, if not friendship, developed between them. On Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Haley's arrival, a storm finally broke out at the Donnelly house. It all started at breakfast, when Veronica came downstairs with a glass of wine in her hand, at 10 in the morning, which was unusual even for her. "Good morning, family," she said with undisguised sarcasm, looking around the table at Haley, Elizabeth, Nathan, and Martha. "What a lovely picture, all together like one big happy family. The only one missing is Fred, but luckily he's spared this spectacle." "Mom, please," Nathan said quietly, glancing worriedly at her glass. "It's too early for this." "Too early for what, dear?" Veronica took a sip of wine. "For the truth? To finally say out loud what we're all thinking?" She turned to Elizabeth, her eyes narrowing. "You're happy, aren't you? You came back here to the house that was once yours, and now you're enjoying my humiliation? That your daughter got everything that should have been mine and Nathan's?" "Veronica," Elizabeth replied calmly, "I only came because Haley asked me to. I don't want this house or anything else that belonged to Fred." "Lies," Veronica snapped, raising her voice. "I've seen you whispering in corners, looking through old photos, reminiscing about the good old days. You're trying to erase me from the history of this house, from Fred's life." "No one is trying to erase you," Haley interjected. "We're just trying to understand what happened, to make sense of the past." "And what have you figured out?" Veronica looked at her defiantly. "That your precious daddy loved your mommy his whole life? That he married me out of desperation and loneliness? That all these years, part of his heart belonged to you, not to Nathan and me?" She slammed her glass down on the table, spilling wine onto the tablecloth. "Yes, I always knew it," she continued bitterly. "I knew I could never replace your mother in his heart, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I tried to be the perfect wife. He never loved me the way he loved her. Mom. Nathan stood up from his seat, trying to calm her down, but Veronica waved him away. And you know what's funny? Her lips twisted into an unpleasant smile. I never loved him either. Not a single day in all these 8 years. Silence hung in the room. Even Martha, accustomed to her mistress's mood swings, froze with the teapot in her hand. What are you saying, Mom? Nathan asked quietly, his face pale. The truth, dear. The plain truth. Veronica picked up her glass again and took a big gulp. I married Fred because he was a successful businessman with a nice house and a steady income. Because I was tired of struggling from paycheck to paycheck, saving on everything to pay for your school. Because I wanted status, comfort, security. She looked at Elizabeth. You left him because he chose his company over his family, and I married him precisely because of that company, for the money and status it gave her. Mom, stop! Nathan's voice was pained. You don't mean that. You loved Fred, I know. You don't know anything, dear. Veronica looked at her son with pity. You were a child when we got married. Of course, I tried to make you believe in our happy family, but the truth is, neither he nor I were ever happy together. We were just pretending, he to fill the void left by the loss of true love, and I to have a comfortable life. Veronica, Elizabeth said gently, I think you're upset right now and saying things you'll regret later. Don't tell me how I feel, Veronica snapped. You don't know anything about me. She turned back to Haley, her eyes burning with anger. And you show up here after all these years and suddenly you get everything. The house, the company, even Nathan is on your side now. It's not fair. I spent 8 years of my life with Fred, pretending to be a caring wife, putting up with his coldness, his obsession with work, his constant regret about the past. I deserve this inheritance. I do. I didn't ask Father to leave me anything, Haley replied quietly. And if you really never loved him, as you now claim, then how can you claim his inheritance? Veronica froze for a moment, then her face contorted with rage. You? How dare you? She grabbed the folder of documents lying on the edge of the table, the very letters and notes that Haley had been collecting and studying for the past few days. This is what I think of your precious evidence, Veronica exclaimed, and threw the folder into the fireplace, where the morning fire was crackling. No! Haley rushed to the fireplace, trying to save the papers, but it was too late. The flames had already engulfed the edge of the folder. Fortunately, at that moment, Nathan lunged forward and snatched the folder from the fire, burning his fingers but saving most of the documents. That's enough, Mom, he said firmly, handing the folder to Haley. This is too much. Veronica stared at her son, unable to believe her eyes. You're defending her? I'm defending the truth, Nathan replied calmly. And Fred's memory. He was a father to me, even if not by blood. He loved me, cared for me, gave me his name. I won't let you tarnish his memory just because you didn't get what you wanted. Veronica looked as if she had been struck. She looked from Nathan to Haley, then to Elizabeth, and finally back to her son. So that's how it is, she said in a quiet, dangerous voice. You've chosen their side, too. Well, fine. Enjoy your new family. She turned abruptly and left the dining room, and a minute later her bedroom door slammed upstairs. I'm sorry, Nathan said, looking at Haley and Elizabeth. She wasn't always like this. It's just that these last few weeks, it's all been too much for her. Don't apologize for your mother, Elizabeth said softly. She's hurting, and she's expressing that pain in the only way she knows how, with anger. Haley carefully opened the folder, checking the documents. Most of them were intact, although the edges of some of the papers were singed. Thank you, Nathan, she said, looking at her stepbrother gratefully. You saved them. Nathan shrugged awkwardly, looking at his reddened fingers. These are important documents. Part of your family's history. They shouldn't be destroyed because of a momentary outburst of anger. Martha gently took his hand, examining the burns. You need to rinse it with cold water, Mr. Nathan, she said, leading him to the sink. And apply ice. After breakfast, Haley went up to her room and laid out the rescued documents on her bed. Letters from her father, photographs, notes. everything that had helped her understand the man she barely knew, but was connected to by blood and a shared history. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Haley said, without looking up from the papers. Her mother entered the room, quietly closing the door behind her. "Can I come in?" she asked, even though she was already inside. "Of course," Haley said, moving over to make room on the bed. "I'm just trying to organize everything." Elizabeth sat down next to her, looking at the documents spread out on the bed. "You know," she said quietly, "I always thought Fred just chose his career over us, that the company meant more to him than his family. All these years I've lived with resentment and bitterness, convinced I knew the truth." She picked up one of the photos, the three of them at a picnic, happy, smiling, a real family. But it turns out the truth is more complicated, that Fred wasn't a heartless careerist but just a scared man, a man who was afraid to show his weakness, afraid of disappointing those he loved. "And so he pushed everyone away," Haley added quietly. "Yes," Elizabeth nodded. "It was his defense mechanism. Better to leave than wait to be left." She looked at her daughter with a sad smile. "I'm not excusing him. What he did hurt us. But now at least I understand why he did it." They sat in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. "What are you going to do now?" Elizabeth finally asked. "With the house, the company, all of it?" Haley thought about it. The question had been on her mind since Warren read the will. Should she turn down the inheritance, accept it, sell everything and go back to her old life? "I don't know," she replied honestly. "I like my job at the orphanage. I love the children and feel like I'm doing something important. But on the other hand, my father's company is also important. Dozens of people work there and their families depend on it." "You could sell the company," Elizabeth suggested. "Or hire a manager." "I could," Haley nodded. "But something tells me that my father left the company to me for a reason, that it was his way of saying that he trusts me. He believes that I can preserve what was important to him." Elizabeth hugged her daughter around the shoulders. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But remember, it's your life, and you have to live it the way you think is right. Don't try to fulfill your father's wishes just because you feel obligated." Haley pressed herself against her mother, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. "I missed you, Mom," she whispered. "All these years. We were together, but I felt like part of you was always somewhere else, in a past you couldn't let go of." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth replied quietly. "I thought I was protecting you by hiding the truth, but maybe I was just protecting myself from the pain." They sat there for a while, simply enjoying each other's company, rebuilding the bond that had always been there but had sometimes weakened due to unspoken words and hidden resentments. That evening, Haley gathered everyone in the living room: Elizabeth, Nathan, Veronica, who came down reluctantly, her eyes red from crying, and Martha. "I've made a decision," she said when everyone was seated, "and I want you to hear it from me personally." She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I am accepting my father's inheritance, the house and the company. But I want us all to understand what that means." Haley turned to Veronica. "Veronica, I understand your disappointment and anger. You spent 8 years with my father, and regardless of your feelings for him, you were his wife. But I can't allow you to stay in this house, given everything that has happened between us." Veronica pressed her lips together but said nothing. "You have 3 months, as specified in the will, to find a new place to live. And you have the $100,000 your father left you. I hope that will be enough for a fresh start." Then Haley turned to Nathan. "Nathan, you've worked with your father for the last few years. You know the company inside out. I'd like you to continue working there if you want to. Your 10% share isn't just a number, it's recognition of your contribution." Nathan looked surprised. "You want me to stay?" "Yes." Haley nodded. "I'll be honest. I don't know much about the construction business. I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows the company and its employees. If you agree, I'd like you to be my partner in managing the company." "What about housing?" Nathan asked cautiously. "Can I stay here?" Haley shook her head. I think you, like your mother, would be better off finding your own place. You're a grown man now. It's time to start your own life. But I'm not rushing you. You have time to find the right place. Nathan nodded, accepting her decision. I understand. And thank you for the offer of partnership. I'd like to continue working for the company. Finally, Haley turned to her mother. Mom, I know you have your own life in another city, but I want you to know that this house is always open to you. It was once your home, and it can be again if you want it to be. Elizabeth smiled gently. Thank you, dear, but I think it's best if I go back home. There are too many memories connected with this place, both good and bad, but I promise I'll visit more often. Veronica, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. What about the housekeeper? She asked, nodding toward Martha. Are you going to keep her? Of course, Haley replied without hesitation. If Martha wants to stay, I'd be delighted. What about me? Veronica's voice trembled. What will happen to me? For the first time ever, Haley saw in her not an authoritative, self-confident woman, but simply a person who had lost her footing, frightened by the uncertainty of the future. I don't know, Veronica, she replied honestly. It's up to you. You have the money to start a new life. Maybe go back to the job you left to marry your father, or find something new? Veronica smiled bitterly. That's easy to say. I'm 45 years old and haven't worked in 8 years. Who would want me? You don't have to leave Redmond, Haley said gently. You can stay here, find an apartment, be close to Nathan. Veronica was silent, staring at the floor. Finally, she looked up at Haley. You know what's ironic? She asked quietly. I always envied your mother. Even when she was away, even when I had Fred, a home, all of that. I knew that part of his heart always belonged to her. And now I envy you, because you have everything I ever wanted. I didn't ask for it, Haley replied. I know, Veronica nodded. That's the irony of it. She stood up, straightened her shoulders, and once again became the proud, unapproachable woman she had always presented herself to be. I'll find an apartment within a month. I don't need your 3 months. The sooner I get out of here, the better for all of us. With that, she left the room, leaving the others in silence. She's a strong woman, Elizabeth said after a pause. She'll be fine. I know, Haley nodded. And Nathan will be there for her, right? Nathan nodded, looking gratefully at Haley. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. For understanding. For offering me a partnership. And for not kicking my mom out on the street, despite everything that happened. We all make mistakes, Haley shrugged. And we all deserve a second chance. Over the next few weeks, life at the Donnelly house gradually settled into a new routine. Veronica, true to her word, found a small but cozy apartment in the city center and moved there, taking only her personal belongings and Fred's gifts with her. Nathan stayed on at the company, but also began looking for a place to live. The process was slower since he spent most of his time at work, helping Haley settle into her new role. Elizabeth returned to her hometown, but now came regularly on weekends, gradually rebuilding her relationship with her daughter and rediscovering the city that had once been her home. Haley divided her time between her father's company and the children's home. She couldn't completely give up the work that gave her so much joy and meaning. Instead, she hired an assistant to work with the children when Haley was busy at the company. One evening, as Haley sat in her father's office sorting through documents, there was a soft knock at the door. Come in, she said without looking up from her papers. The door opened and Martha entered with a cup of tea. I thought you might need a break, Miss Haley, she said, placing the cup on the table. You've been working since this morning. Thank you, Martha, Haley smiled, putting down her pen. You always know what I need. The elderly woman smiled warmly in response. You're very much like your father, you know. He could sit for hours poring over documents, forgetting everything else in the world. Haley picked up the cup, inhaling the aroma of freshly brewed tea. Do you think he would approve of what I'm doing? She asked, surprising herself. Martha sat down on the edge of the chair opposite the table. I think he would be proud of you, miss. Not only did you save his company, but you also found a way to combine it with something you truly care about. Haley smiled, thinking of the project she had recently launched. Part of the company's profits now went to support the New Hope Orphanage and other charities in the city. "You know, sometimes I think that's what he wanted," Haley said thoughtfully. "Not just to pass on material possessions to me, but to give me the chance to create something new, something better than what he had." "Perhaps," Martha nodded. "Your father was a complicated man, Miss Haley. He made mistakes, like all of us. But deep down, he always wanted to do the right thing. He just didn't always know how." Haley sipped her tea, thinking about the path that had led her here. From a hurt daughter who had lost a father she barely knew to the heir to his business, his home, his legacy. A path full of discoveries, pain, forgiveness, and finally, acceptance. "How's Veronica? Have you talked to her lately?" "Yes, miss," Martha nodded. "I stop by sometimes and bring her some homemade cookies. She's adjusting. She found a job at a law firm, nothing fancy, but it's a start." "And Nathan? Does he visit her?" "Often," Martha smiled. "He's a good boy. He cares about his mother, even if she doesn't always appreciate it." Haley nodded, glad that Nathan hadn't abandoned his mother in her time of need, despite their difficult relationship. "And you, Miss Haley?" Martha asked cautiously. "Have you found what you were looking for? Peace? Answers?" Haley thought about it. Had she found peace? Answers to the questions that had tormented her all these years? Did she finally understand her father, his choices, his life? "I think so," she finally replied. "I realized that my father was neither a hero nor a villain. He was just a man, with his fears, his weaknesses, his mistakes. A man who lost what was dear to him and lived with that loss for the rest of his life." She looked at the photo of her father on the table, not an official portrait, but a snapshot of him smiling, standing on a construction site surrounded by workers. "And I realized that I could forgive him, not because he deserves it or doesn't deserve it, but because I deserve that forgiveness myself, so that I can move on, build my life without the burden of resentment and misunderstanding." Martha smiled and nodded approvingly. "Your father would have been happy to hear that, Miss Haley. He was so afraid you would never be able to forgive him." They sat in the cozy silence of the office where Fred Donnelly had once worked, where he had made decisions that changed the lives of many people, including his own daughter. Now she sat here, continuing his work, but in her own way, creating her own path. 2 weeks later, on a bright spring day, Haley stood on the porch of the New Hope Children's Home, looking at the new playground that had just been installed with funds from her father's company. The children were noisily exploring the new swings, slides, and carousels, their laughter echoing throughout the grounds. "Miss Haley! Look how high I can go!" Joshua shouted, swinging on the new swing. "I can see you, champ!" She smiled, watching the boy who had once been afraid of heights and was now enthusiastically conquering new heights. Standing next to her was the director of the orphanage, Patricia Morgan, looking gratefully at the transformed grounds. "I don't know how to thank you, Haley," she said. "This is exactly what the children needed." "Not me," Haley shook her head. "My father. This is his legacy." "A legacy you are continuing," Patricia reminded her gently, "and I must say you're doing a wonderful job." Haley looked at the children playing, at the new playground, at the orphanage building, which was now also awaiting renovation by Donnelly Construction. She thought about her father, her mother, Veronica, and Nathan, Martha, all the people who, in their own way, had led her to this moment. Her father had left her more than just a house and a company. He had left her a chance to correct the mistakes of the past, heal old wounds, and create something new, something based not on fear and hidden resentment, but on honesty, care, and love. And she was going to make the most of that chance.